Hello and welcome to this episode of In Sync, where we'll be talking about your inner architecture. So instead of starting with a framework or theory, I thought I'd start by taking you into my Year 10 English classroom, where the three of us were always debating. We were loud, opinionated, and very disruptive. And one day, after this had been going on for a little while, my English teacher pulled us aside and we all thought we were in trouble, going to get detention or something like that, right? Instead, she suggested that we put our energy to better use, and she nominated us to become the three members of the high school debating team, and she wanted us to go on to represent our school in the inter-school debates. And she didn't just nominate us, in fact, she was telling us this is what we were going to do with this energy. She then nominated me as captain and second speaker for the debating team, which is the position that required the strongest speaker. So obviously she saw something in me that I'd had no training or no coaching for, just some natural ability that she thought would be better channeled into something more productive. Now, of course, she gave us a little bit of guidance on how to structure our talks and things like that and the debates, but I had no formal training for this. She could have chosen any one of the 200 plus students in our Year 10 level at our school, but she obviously felt we were the standouts, right, clearly. So there we were. We competed against some other schools in our region, and it was being hosted by the Rotary Club. And after several rounds, going up against several different schools, we ended up getting to the final and we won. Now, being at the Rotary Club, they invited families and friends from, both schools that were in the final, and there were probably a good, 50 to 100 people there altogether. And my mum and dad came along to see me speak at this debate. And I just remember my dad said to me at the end of all of it after we'd won, and he said, "Hey, Christian, I never knew you had that talent." And that stood with me all these years. And because it stood out because Dad didn't often acknowledge our accomplishments. He had really high standards and expectations. So I didn't really know I had this ability either. It was just already there waiting, obviously, to be seen. And then the following Monday morning assembly, we were able to present the trophy to our principal. And I still have my own individual trophy that I got that day as well. From way back then, we were handed our individual trophies. But I didn't do much with it. The little trophy ended up gathering dust for a number of years. I ended up finishing school. And then I tried to get into university, but I missed out on getting in because my tertiary entrance score was slightly too low for the programs that I had applied to. And I just remember one of the universities that I'd applied to, one of the counsellors reached out to me and asked me to come and pay him a visit. And then he suggested that I'd be better off going for one of the other programs that he had that he thought I could be well suited for, which was a program in computer science and maths, which I was pretty good as an all-round student, and but he felt that it would be better for me to pursue a career in computer science or maths where a lot of the opportunities were. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do at university. I didn't even know what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew that my parents wanted me to go on to university. So being forced to take a year, take a year off, it sounded like the right move was to bide my time and put myself forward for this program. And what stood out to me about the program, though, is it had what a number of other programs didn't have, and other university programs didn't have at the time, which was an optional year of industry-based learning that you could go and embark upon after you completed 5 out of your 6 academic semesters. So I ended up getting into this program thanks to the counsellor. It wasn't a degree that I applied for, but obviously it was one that I could do. And I was just happy that I was able to go to university after having a year off. Dad certainly wasn't pleased with me, and we had a lot of conflict that year. He just was really disappointed that I didn't get into university because he thought that I was intelligent enough to get a university degree and get a better job. And that's all my parents wanted. Was they just didn't want me to be factory workers as they were as immigrants when they moved to Australia. and they wanted me to have a better life and have a cleaner office job and not have to work in factories my whole life. So they were really hoping that I would go on to university, didn't really care what I did. So I ended up doing the program, and when I came to my year of industry-based learning, there were a number of different organizations that I had to interview for, but I ended up getting one for BHP in their IT division, which was a large organization, one of Australia's biggest organizations. And I learned a lot during that year. And then when I came back during my final semester, it was about midway through the semester, perhaps towards the latter stage of that semester. And it's at that stage that we're all, looking for and thinking about, life after university, going on to our graduate positions and things like that. And my university was conducting some campus interviews, and they were inviting, organizations to come and interview some of their students on campus. So they then suggested that we apply to, a handful of the organizations that were coming on campus to interview. I didn't really like the sound of any of them. A lot of them were very programming focused and that kind of technical development work. But I ended up applying to 5 or 6 because I thought, that's what I had to do, right? And that was what my university had prepared me for. So I applied for 5 or 6 of them. But even though it didn't feel right, I thought I had to go through the motions, right, and do what was expected of me. And then towards the end of that day, I'd completed all my interviews, and I ended up bumping into this guy in the hallway where they were holding the campus interviews. And we just started chatting. He was young, well-dressed, looking very professional, and we just vibed and clicked. And he proceeded to tell me a little bit more about his organization and his experience. It wasn't a pitch or anything. He was just sharing his authentic experience and how he loved to work for his organization. And it was called Ernst & Young Consulting. They were the consulting division for the large, what was a Big Six firm at the time. And I had no idea who Ernst & Young were. I had no idea what a Big Four or a Big Six consulting firm was. But they had a spare interview slot, and he asked if I was interested in having an interview with his senior consultant that was interviewing that day. So I said, sure. We were vibing, it felt good. So I decided that I was going to say yes to it. And he then asked me if I had another copy of my resume. And of course I didn't, because I'd handed them to all the companies that I was interviewing for. And he said, well, how about if you just go and grab a copy of your resume from one of the folks you've interviewed with today? So I looked over, and the door was open to the last interview I was in. And he wasn't interviewing. It looked like he was done. So I walked in and asked if I could have my resume back. And he wasn't pleased, but he reluctantly gave me back my resume, and I handed it to the consultant who handed it to his senior consultant. And all of a sudden I was being interviewed. And I'll never forget it. It was a really pleasant interview. We vibed. They were both lovely. And I just felt like this could be a place that I'd enjoy working at. So about a week later, I get a letter in the mail saying I'd been invited to a second round interview at Ernst & Young's head office, which was on Collins Street in Melbourne at the time. And then I was being interviewed by an executive consultant in this 50-story building, beautiful 50-story building. My parents drove me in, so they were really hopeful that I'd get what they saw. They thought, wow, this is amazing. So I got interviewed by an executive consultant. She was a lot more formal than the other two who I met on campus, but she was still really pleasant and had a great interview. So obviously, I think my year of industry-based learning really helped me to stand out, but I think they also liked my attitude, and they could see me, in client-facing roles after being trained. So about a week later, I get a letter in the mail saying I'd been offered a graduate position at Ernst & Young. And that was it. I was stoked. I had about 9 weeks off between finishing university and then going on to start my graduate position. And my parents were overjoyed. These folks that were immigrants and factory workers, and all of a sudden their son had finally landed a really, really good, amazing office job that they had always dreamed of. So looking back and reflecting, you could see that there was this top-down identity forming, and I'll share what that means a little later on as we go along. But as an Ernst & Young graduate, this identity was starting to form. But then about 18 months to 2 years into my graduate position at EY, something started happening. I started waking up between 2 and 3 a.m. every morning, wide awake and tossing and turning. And after this had been going on for weeks and weeks, I finally gave in one night to the tossing and turning, and I just decided to just turn the TV on and just wait it out, right? I switched on the TV, and all of a sudden there's this American guy, loud, big teeth, tall, energetic guy talking about controlling your mind and transforming your life, and all about human transformation and personal development. And I had no idea who this guy was, but it was Tony Robbins. And at the time, he wasn't a household name in Australia, but also wasn't a household name in the US either. But he certainly was still quite big, and his events attracted thousands of people. And he was selling this $250 CD set that was a bit steep for me at the time as a graduate. That was probably the equivalent of about $1,000 by today's terms. And it was a bit too much for me to justify. I don't know, I was a bit skeptical, even though the infomercial sounded good and it felt good. I was just getting a bit worried. So I ended up letting it go. I didn't go with it. And it sat with me that night. But then the next day I went back to my job and got on with life. About a week later, I'm having a lunch break, and I was out in the city that day, and I was walking through the department store called My Melbourne. And back then they used to have large book sections with real books, right? And all of a sudden there was this one book that stood out to me on the hundreds of books that were there. And it just felt like it was pulling me towards it. And it was quite an attractive color that I noticed. So I walked over to it, and the closer I got to it, I could finally read that the book was called Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins. Same guy from the infomercial that I'd come across about a week or so before. The book was $20. So I really had no excuse this time. It was I could easily justify that if the book was full of crap, no problem, right? So I bought the book and I couldn't put it down, which is saying a lot for me because I wasn't a strong reader and I didn't enjoy reading during university. It just felt heavy to read books, but I just couldn't put this book down. And I read from cover to cover, and I started applying what I learned in the book, and my career started to expand and go from strength to strength. And I was starting to land the top projects, and within about 6 months, I was getting to fly up to Sydney and back and forth onto some projects that were higher profile projects in Sydney, where I was learning how to use some of the enterprise applications that were commanding top tier rates and would eventually lead me to making large salaries that would put me in the top 2% of IT wage earners. And so one weekend, after being going back and forth for a number of months, one weekend I'm in a cab on my way to Sydney Airport from work one Friday evening, and I see this billboard, Tony Robbins coming to Sydney, September 1998, and I ended up realizing, well, that was the guy, right? From my book and from the infomercial, he's coming to Australia. I wasn't looking for it. It just appeared. But of course, I had to go. So I signed up, bought my ticket, and a month or two later, there I was at this 4-day event in Sydney called the Unleash the Power Within weekend. It was UPW, one of Tony's signature events. And that event just changed my life forever. It all at once, just permanently, my life was on a completely different trajectory altogether. And I just remember though that after applying what I learned and was doing really well, and then I met a couple of independent consultants that were on the project that I was on because E&Y needed some more resources to deliver the project. We vibed and we clicked, and they were telling me all about how much money I could make with the skills that I had been learning if I moved to London. It was around the time of the Y2K boom, just before the year 2000, and there was a lot of expenditure going on in IT with new projects and new systems to solve the Y2K bug problem. Anyway, so I ended up quitting E&Y and went to London and to become an independent consultant. And I would have never done any of that had it not been for how I had felt more empowered by what I'd learned from Tony Robbins. And my income had gone from 60,000 Australian dollars a year to 300,000 Australian dollars a year within the space of a couple of months, just by making that leap and moving to London and taking that calculated risk. There I was in my mid-20s, traveling around Europe, living an amazing life, buying all kinds of flashy clothes and buying all new things, traveling, meeting new people, investing in more and more personal development programs with Tony and some other personal development experts, including Deepak Chopra and whatnot. And I was living the life, right? Everyone thought I had it all, and I was having fun. But privately, after about 4 or 5 years, I just noticed this growing sense inside of me where I just often felt miserable. And it was this persistent sort of signal that something important was going on inside of me, and I couldn't quite put a finger on what it was, but I kept it to myself. And then around 2004, I felt this more and more going on within me, and I decided to look into doing some more of what I learned from Tony. I decided to do more of Tony's work, and what I found on his programs was he had a leadership program that you could embark upon, and I decided to sign up for that year-long program that included 3 programs, and I ended up doing them all and then finishing them. And the way it worked back then is once you completed the year of the leadership program, if they thought you applied and understood the content well, they would invite you to become a senior leader, and you could go on and get onto the trainer development path and work for Tony and attend the events. So I was fortunate enough to be recognized as excelling in the leadership program. So I got invited by Tony's people to become a senior leader for him. And I was able to then go on this path. And at that point, you don't pay for the events anymore. You pay for your own expenses to get there, but you don't pay. And you're getting training that money can't buy. And they're essentially training you on how to develop the same kind of skills that Tony uses to transform lives at his events. And my role then as a senior leader was to help people get the transformation that they come to get from the events. And after about 5 years as a student, learning as a student, I then ended up spending a further 5 years as a senior leader, developing more and more transformational skills, and this new identity was starting to form. And everywhere I went, in my personal life, even in my professional life, people tended to find me, whether it be, at airports, traveling and just sitting at the gate or a bar and chatting to people, whether it would be social events, barbecues, even 4 a.m. at nightclubs, right? I find myself in a half sober state, having these deep conversations with people where I was, communicating and sharing what I'd learned from Tony on how to improve my life. And I could see what people often needed. And it just always flowed out effortlessly with no forcing. And so that year 10 gift kept coming back, right? Even though it was coming back through different conditions, it kept coming back. It was the same gift that had always been. So eventually I left London and moved back to Australia briefly. And then I met my now ex-wife, and who was American. And I moved to the United States. And it was there after a little while that we came across positive psychology, and it sounded sort of familiar. And I saw that as an opportunity to continue on the natural path that I'd learned in personal development. There seemed to be a lot of synergies there. So I got interested, and I thought it could add a lot of credibility and weight to the personal development I was doing. And perhaps it would allow me to have a more academic grounding with the kind of work that I was doing to create positive change in the world, right? And we found out about the Positive Psychology Conference that was going to be at Disney World back in 2015 in Orlando, Florida. So I thought it would be more like a Tony Robbins event, but we ended up signing up, and it was a 3-day event, and we ended up flying all the way there. Yeah, I thought it would be a bit more like a Tony Robbins event in that it would be a lot of fun and sort of high vibes, positive energy, music, that kind of thing. But we got there and it was really dry and really academic and really disappointing, if I'm to be honest. It was a lot of PhD students showcasing their work and sharing their results and things like that. And after about 2/3, 3/4 of a day, my ex-partner and I, we decided that we weren't going to continue on and go to the rest of the programs for the remaining 2 and a bit days, but we were just going to go and enjoy being in Disney World, right? And because we didn't know if Disney World was more of a kid's fun park or an adult fun park, because there were lots of pools and bars and cocktails being sold everywhere around the venue. So we thought, let's just leave this event and go get some cocktails. So we're on the way out and we're walking past the main event hall, and we just hear this rapturous applause going on from this main room. So we thought, well, before we leave, let's just poke our heads in and see what's going on, see who it is. And we stepped in, and there's a guy called David Cooperrider who was on stage just being introduced. The slides were still there on the screen, teaching what he came up with what he founded, which was this new science called appreciative inquiry. And I'd never heard of him. I'd never heard of what he was teaching before, but it sounded good. And so we thought we'd stick around, and I'd just find a couple of seats in the back and lay low, right, before we exited and got some cocktails. But there were no seats in the back, and we were looking everywhere for some seats. The only seats we found were at the very front row. There were 2 seats right at the front. They were obviously made for me and my ex-partner. And we sat down, and I loved everything he was saying. He was showing some real opportunities for doing new work that could really create some positive change in the kind of organizations that I'd been working in for a number of years. And I got interested and inspired, and I decided it felt right. It felt like the right move, right? So I looked into whether I could learn this and how I could learn this. And he had the certificate program, but there was also a master's degree where you could also earn the certificate within the master's degree. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go all in, right? I'm going to do the master's program. I didn't have a master's degree, and I thought it would be a good move for my career. So I went and did that, and I'm glad I did, because it ended up teaching me some other things that I'll share in episode 4, where I learned some other things that have provided some real grounded academic foundations for the InSync OS. So, and I wouldn't have been there at that event had I not moved to the US. So the pattern that you may have been able to see right now is through the career counselor at the university, the hallway conversation with the EY consultant, the book on the shelf at Maya, the billboard in the cab, the applause through the front door drawing me into that room. None of it was planned. None of it was consciously manifested, but it was all connected. And it was all building towards something I hadn't ever foreseen. So just let that sit for a moment. So what actually was happening in all of that? If you were to look deep down, what was actually happening? I mean, I just walked you through about 30 years of my life. So what I'd like to do right now is give you a framework for what was happening, because I think once you see it, you may well recognize this in your own life. And it's what I call inner architecture. And there are 3 layers to it. So inner architecture, if you watched episode 1, you might have recalled I talked about the acorn analogy, right? So your inner architecture is it's like this acorn. It has like this invisible blueprint in it that shapes your life. And just like the acorn, it has everything within it in order to support you throughout your life as you can move towards wholeness and experiencing everything that you need to experience in your life. So your inner architecture is this invisible blueprint that's shaping your life. So in much the same way that the acorn has everything it needs in it to grow into a grand oak tree, it just needs the right conditions, right? It needs some soil and some water and sunlight, and eventually it has everything it needs within it to grow into that grand oak tree. Your inner architecture works the same way for you. It's not something you create. It's something you uncover. Now, it's been shaping your life all along, and there are 3 layers to it. Each layer deeper and more influential than the last. So the first layer of your inner architecture is the psychological layer. So this is where your thoughts, your beliefs, values, your conscious reasoning, your identities, and your ego lives here, right? And this is the layer that most personal development tends to focus on through mindset work. And it's certainly where my IT consultant identity lived. It was very logical, it was very strategic, it was very mindset focused and creating, external results, and they were very measurable. And you can do everything right at this level, but you can still feel empty from my experience. So the 2 a.m. waking up way back then wasn't a thought. It was coming from somewhere deeper than this layer. And as I mentioned, you can do everything right at this level. You can continue to work on your mindset and still feel like there's something empty. And I certainly noticed that over the years that a lot of personal development will tell you that if your life isn't where you want it to be, then you just need to do some more mindset work so that you can improve your performance. And that can work for a while, but it can also lead to this never-ending loop of constant self-editing and constant need to fix your mindset or improve your mindset or build on your mindset. And it tends to have this focus on fixing your mindset rather than this focus on self-discovery. And that's one of the things that I've learned from exploring this area of our life. Now, the second layer is the emotional and somatic layer. So this is the layer where you may experience your intuition, some gut feelings, body signals. This is where you can feel your nervous system responding to certain things or being triggered by certain things, right? This is where alignment in your life is often felt before it's understood. And you can often feel, getting out of alignment, right? That can be felt too, before the conscious mind catches up and can understand it. So a lot of those experiences that I was having where I was feeling things were right, feeling that the consultants from Ernst & Young at campus represented the right company to work towards, but also when I was miserable in London, even though I was earning 300k, feeling privately miserable, there was this persistent stuff where something important is coming into your awareness, right? And this is that part of us that even neuroscience confirms that a lot of our decision making that we make is made at this level. It's made based on our emotions first, and then we often justify it with logic from our psychological layer after we've already made most of our decisions based on how we're feeling. Now, when you are trying to figure out, what voice is going on inside you, if you're ever wondering how do I know what my inner truth is saying, what my inner voice is saying, it often whispers. It's often a lot quieter than the voice of your ego, and at that psychological layer, it's often a lot quieter. It rarely ever shouts to you. But sometimes things can happen abruptly that can really get your attention. But most of the time, your inner voice is a lot more silent than the voice of the ego that often tries to keep you safe. And that brings us then to the third and deepest layer, which is the archetypal layer. So this is the layer that Carl Jung spent a lot of time and a lot of his many decades of clinical practice observing his patients. And he was able to identify a number of universal patterns that existed at this deeper layer that often represented some symbolic intelligence as well. And it often expresses itself through our dreams, through synchronicities that we'll talk about in the next episode, through timing of events, the things that happen, and through people. So if you recall that year 10 debating gift that I shared with you at the beginning, that was this layer emerging, wanting to be expressed, right? Because there was no conscious thought that led to that actually happening that led to me wanting to do that. It was just something that was showing up, right? It exists before our parents' expectations or before any conditioning can occur. And just from my experience, a lot of personal development doesn't really go down to this layer, to this here. But the InSync OS is built around it because it's such an important layer to understand this, because this is often a layer that's speaking to us and trying to move us forward in life and to often guide us without our conscious awareness. Now, as I mentioned, most personal development teachers I've come across don't teach at this layer. Most of them teach at the psychological layer, layer 1, and there are more and more now that are teaching at the emotional and somatic layer, layer 2. And you may have come across this through folks that are teaching a lot of breath work or fascial release programs or other type of body work that gets you into your body to learn how to tap into your intuition and what's going on in your body, and often releasing energy that can be stuck in and stored in your body through emotions that we experience throughout our life that never really get resolved or expressed. So, but this archetypal layer is one of the reasons why I wanted to include this in the InSync OS, so that we can begin understanding ourselves from this deeper layer, because it can offer us some real clarity and a new way to lean in and trust life. So if we were to now look at those three layers and map them onto the three layers and map them onto the story that I shared with you, layer 1 could represent that IT's consultant identity, right? Very conditioned, very logical, focused on achieving external results that the world expected of him, right? The layer 2 could represent that felt sense that was showing up from time to time when certain things were coming up and felt right? So like the consultants that I met that I vibed with, or even that private misery that I was experiencing in London that was telling me that something else was wanting to be heard and wanting to be seen. It's the body signaling, that this is right or this isn't right, yeah? And then there could be layer 3 that could be emerging through that debating gift that showed up in 10th grade, the 2 a.m. wake-up calls, the folks meeting those folks in the hallway, the book in Maya Melbourne, the billboard showing up on that path that the cab driver could have taken any other path to the airport. There were several different paths and he chose that one path. The event in Orlando, in walking past the room right when David Cooperrider was showing up. All these three levels are operating simultaneously the entire time, but the deeper layers are always trying to be heard, especially at times of change in your life and times of transformation in your life. So there can often be two arcs running in parallel in your life. There's what I like to call the top-down development arc, which is the natural development arc, where we're conditioned through our psyche and imprinted through what we're observing in our life when we're babies and young children growing up. And it usually comes through our society and family, advisors, and in my case, it led me to being conditioned from the top down into an IT consultant. And for a while, that seemed to be okay and that seemed to be working. And then the other arc is what I call the bottom up arc of developing and expanding through life and growing through life. And this is where the archetypal layer is leading, right? And in my case, that's what led to expressing the speaking gift in year 10, the 2 a.m. wake-ups, trying to get me to pay attention to something, and eventually has led to the development of this new operating system for life that I'm building in the InSync OS. So there are these two development parts, right, that can often run in parallel. And it's not that top-down is wrong. Top-down can often be very aligned with your true path. But what I've found is that it tends to, if it is aligned to your true path, it can often be that way, but then you can then also find you can get stuck there in that identity and never listen to the bottom up that's trying to emerge. So in my case, I feel like the top down was fine for when I was growing up, and it was leading me to uncover the bottom up, but I stayed stuck in that IT consultant identity for too long and didn't actually express enough of the bottom up, and I didn't listen enough to the bottom up that was emerging. So it's, with my top down, I built some real skills there that I still use today, but it's never the complete story. And it's not about rejecting the top down. It's about allowing this new operating system to which has that deeper nature of our architecture to take the lead and to integrate everything that's occurred that's led us to where we are in our lives, but allow that bottom up arc to take the lead. And that was when we can often find even greater fulfillment, where we can then really embrace what Carl Jung called individuation. And this stood out to me when I came across it, because it just resonated deeply, because I was starting to notice this, that a lot of the personal development that I've come across is trying to get us to control our growth and expansion, right? By continuing to work on our mindset largely and improve the quality of our lives so that we can perform better and have better lives, right? And it's not wrong. It comes from the right place. But what I've discovered is it's a lot less about building a lot of this stuff that personal development is often teaching us. But it's about letting go of what actually holds us back and interferes with our natural expansion that Jung described as individuation. And this is where our psyche naturally moves towards integration and wholeness throughout our life. Your expansion and growth is innate, and it's about removing the interference to that rather than building things on top of it. Because if we don't release the interference and we just build stuff on top of it, the stuff that's really holding us back is still there. And in my case, some of those negative emotions were still there, and I was just building stuff on top of it with better and better mindsets that just weren't working at the end of the day. So we don't need to control our expansion and natural growth. We just need to learn how to cooperate with it. And what we often find is that, and Jung publicized this in a lot of his clinical studies over decades, is that our archetypes generally rise and generally want to be expressed more and more more synchronicities increase when we're going through periods of change and transformation in one or more areas of our lives. So we will often find that the old self or the old identities will begin to dissolve or integrate into a new identity that can then form. But if we don't embrace that, if we don't learn how to cooperate with it, we can keep ourselves stuck and small. So it's not that this process is trying to break us down per se. It's more about our psyche, reconstructing ourselves as we go through life and building on from our experiences in life. So the InSync OS is a practical way to cooperate with this natural process that Jung called individuation. And I feel like it's going to become more and more important now during a lot of this global transformation and change that we're seeing that is disrupting our lives and leading us into a lot of change. And if what Jung had reported through his decades of clinical observations, that a lot of this occurs during periods of great transformation and change, then if we're seeing a lot of transformation and change in the world at the moment, then I'm expecting there to be a lot more folks that are noticing a lot more of their inner architecture playing out, but not having a language to understand it and trust it. So I guess the key question then can change from how do I fix my life to how do I tune in to my life, right? What is my inner architecture telling me? And this signal has been there since before all the conditioning had occurred. It showed up in all the things that you were naturally good at before anyone taught you. The debating trophy, the 2 a.m. wake-ups, the speaking, etc. And it often shows up in the moments that felt right, when the logic said otherwise, but none of it was random. And your inner architecture has been communicating with you all along, and it often has shown up in between your grand plans when your logic is perhaps overriding it, and you either have been paying attention to it and listening to it and perhaps are more aligned to your path than some other folks, or you haven't been paying attention to it, you've been shoving it down and not listening to it and overriding it with your mindset, and therefore perhaps not recognizing that as a source of inner guidance throughout your life. So inner architecture is the structure. And once it becomes clear, life can start responding differently. Patterns appear, signals emerge, and things really begin to align. And it's not coincidence. It's the second component, which is all about synchronicity-based navigation that I'll talk about in the next episode. See, life has been sending you the signals all along. It's more about how you read them. Just like what occurred for me back then in 10th grade, that opened up a whole sequence of such signals for your life. It wouldn't surprise me at all if this has been showing up for you as well in your life. If so, if you were now to reflect upon this, where could you see that your inner architecture has been showing up through the deeper layers of you and your inner blueprint? Where has that been showing up for you? And therefore, what could you pay a little bit more attention to if you were completely honest? And therefore honor that and as we move along. And my hope is that upon reflecting and hearing that, you'll find some more clarity in your inner architecture and learn how to trust that, which would set us up beautifully for the next episode, which is all about synchronicity-based navigation. I'll see you in the next episode.